Good morning to all you internet podcast subscribers and the world wide web. I'm Lawrence, and I just want to talk about the current weather pattern in the UK. The situation in Britain today confuses me. At the moment, temperatures are skyrocketing, anything between 30 and 40 degrees, something that's probably unprecedented in British history. What's confusing is that the British go to Spain and Italy quite easily, and the temperatures there are 30 to 40 degrees. They bask in the sun in the summertime. And now that the weather has come to their shores, they're complaining about the lack of infrastructure, the issue of closing schools and businesses, and the likely impact of the design of their homes to cater for this. Heavy walls that keep the heat the cold out, but keep the heat in. What is it about the British? Why are they just whinging palms? Here in Australia, the temperatures are quite high most of the time, and people work outdoors all the time without any problems at all. They do risk assessment, say, okay, the guys, this looks good enough to work, let's go for work, or it's not good enough, let's wait until later in the day. Construction goes on quite happily. Businesses in the city are booming as it's as hot as it ever is. 45 degrees in Brisbane or Sydney, and people just continue their business. Um, Talk back in the UK just endlessly talks about the high temperatures as if it's something continuous, continuously occurring. Anyway, let's look at it and see what are the underlying issues. Now, I believe there are some very valid reasons why this discussion is occurring. Britain, first of all, is built for cold weather. Most housing was designed to retain heat and not reject it. So basically, British houses have thick walls, small windows, heavy insulation, limited ventilation, and they rarely have any air conditioning. So those features are great when it's 5 degrees outside in January. But when it becomes 30 degrees, wow, that's a new problem. However, in Australia, what we have is wider eaves, verandas, better airflow, more widespread air conditioning. I've got air conditioning in my house, and work heat management procedures, risk assessments, and the ability to stop work if it's too hot. It's a standard operating procedure on construction and mining sites in the country. And I would imagine that the holiday heat is also different from work heat. So when British people go to Spain, they sit by a pool, drink a cold beer. Normally they're drinking warm beers. They swim in the sea. Wow, because the sea is nice and blue. They take afternoon breaks. They sleep in air conditioned hotels because those countries have air conditioned hotels. But however, a commuter in the UK is facing a crowded train, the London Underground carriages, an office without air conditioning, a hot apartment at night, and that's a different experience. So the issue is not just temperature, it's temperature combined with daily obligations. Now, British infrastructure was never designed for any of this. Australian roads, railways, and workplaces routinely encounter 35 to 45 degrees centigrade. The British infrastructure evolved around a much cooler climate, such as expanding rail tracks in the heat, older trains without any air conditioning, school designed to keep the heat in, hospitals struggling with cooling. So when temperatures go to 40, the British are operating outside their assumptions and outside their design of their infrastructure. Um, and in Australia, however, an Australian would find British weather quite miserable, which they tend to. They go there and they complain bitterly. And British people find summers here quite brutal. I've seen British people, even on a cooler day, suffer the consequences and are stripped bare to the bare bones to try and acclimatize to the heat. And Australians look at them and immediately recognize a whinging Pom, pale skin, basically sunburnt and suffering, even though they don't have any clothes on. Now, in Brisbane, a 34 degrees day might barely make the news, but in Britain, that temperature is not historically available and it's rare, and people only experience it once in a lifetime. Today's media is also to blame. It magnifies everything. And the British media has always spoken about the weather, and it becomes a bigger issue now, particularly in view of the climate change scenarios that they find themselves in. So they will tend to exaggerate conditions, and those conditions can be extreme heat or extreme cold. You know, a snowstorm, the British will say, Britain grinds to a halt, and the heat wave becomes or Britain melts, you know, and then there's travel chaos due to a windy day. Now, that's pretty typical of how to fill the tabloids, talkback, and TV. But Australians do the same during cyclones, floods, bushfires. Everyone remembers the Victorian bushfires to quite an extent, or any extreme heat events. The difference is that Australia's media discusses conditions people already expect because of the highly variable climatic conditions here. Whereas Britain, it discusses it because it's very unusual, because the country has had fairly static temperature variations and weather patterns and no catastrophic or major catastrophic weather events. Now, the climate change issue, that has brought everything to one particular aspect. Everyone's looking and saying, hey, this is all climate change. This is really, we spent 50 years doing nothing about it. Now it has come to home to roost. We haven't done anything. We haven't acclimatized to the climate change. But that complaining is a recognition that infrastructure built for the most of the 20th century may still not be suitable today in the 21st century. Now, in Australia, obviously, there are many things that people do here in most parts of the country. The work continues normally during any temperatures outside the norm. People are accustomed to heat management plans. People have already prepared. They know exactly what to do. They do hydration protocols, drink lots of water. They sometimes carry an esky, what's known as an esky, a water cooler with the sufficient water for workplace scenarios. They have shade structures. Sometimes they carry umbrellas and work under an umbrella. They do risk assessments. Quite famously, that risk assessment is a way of determining what the consequences and likelihood are of catastrophic events. And they then modify their work schedules to suit. So, you know, shall we work or not? And typically the senior management is aware of and has put in place those plans to enable workers to comfortably work without any issues. Now, Britain is only now beginning to find those conditions and adapt accordingly. The other issue about is that there's still the issue of when it's extremely cold in Britain, people actually complain still. And during the extreme cold weather, people have said, well, how come the French and the British, rather, sorry, the French and the Germans can cope and we, the British, cannot? Well, basically because of the European continental conditions, and because they're familiar, the French and the Germans have experienced similar very cold climates compared to the UK, and they've built in uh, basically infrastructure to suit, and the difference is that their roads are better equipped for snow clearance. Buildings have shutters and external blinds. Air conditioning is more common in Germany and France. Rail systems are designed with greater temperature variations in mind to allow for expansion and contraction. Um, well, they still complain, but their issue is more that their infrastructure is resilient. And the British have always built to the bare minimum anyway. And they've said, well, our situation is not really going to change much. Um, Australia, again, it does the opposite in many areas. It's, they cater for cyclones, flooding, very high 45-degree heat, and sometimes dust storms. And that's because failure has consequences. And in Britain, extreme weather has been viewed as an inconvenience rather than a regular operational risk. And the British, as we know, have a talent for complaining. And they will complain about anything. They'll come to Australia and complain about the heat. They'll go to Spain and complain about the heat. They'll complain about the weather, trains, the government, their football team. At the moment, there are expectations on Scotland reaching the semi-finals in the World Cup, and I think they'll complain when Scotland loses to Brazil. That will be interesting. Um, yeah, in Australia, people do complain about the normal things: the traffic, the price of fuel, politicians, humidity. But their style is different. It's probably more humorous. It's more tongue in cheek compared to the British, who tend to be very serious. Um, Now, in conclusion here is, although Britain developed basically industrial economies and administered an empire many miles away across various climatic conditions, what's strange is that Britain itself finds it difficult to cope with the things that the British coped with in their empirical or empire and their colonial rule. It seems weird. However, that's the British for you. That's the British. Prone to complain at the very minute that they are allowed to. And with that, I leave you to ponder over the climatic conditions and how Britain will cope in the future, whether anything relevant or more immediate will come out of this current heat wave. And hopefully the British can learn something from the Australians and Canadians from opposite sides of the spectrum. With that, I say have a good day. Enjoy your heat or your cool weather, wherever you may be in the world, and take it easy. Don't worry, somebody's fixing it. Okay, thank you very much, and a good day.